Okay, well, hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of Behind the Bench, brought to you by the National Soccer Coaching Association of Canada. So this is part 2 of our online webinar that we started a couple of weeks ago. And today we're going to continue our discussion on the topics of where do we go from here. We'll be discussing some of the challenges that Canada faces with regards to talent ID and player development and coaching development, and how these challenges may have impacted on the performance of the U17 boys at the recent World Cup. And also hopefully we can look at what steps can be taken to improve our international performance, both on the youth side and maybe even on the senior side, right? So we're going to talk a little bit, I think we're going to talk a lot about player development, talent ID, coaching development, and we're going to talk about the role of the provincial associations and the Canadian soccer associations in getting things done right. Our panel today is an amazing panel. Stephen Hart, professional soccer coach, football coach, and Stephen has taken many roles of the Canadian Soccer Association, from Canada U17 head coach, Canada U20 men's team, the Canadian men's national team, Trinidad and Tobago men's national team, and head coach with XFX in Halifax. Stephen, welcome, and thank you for taking the time to sharing your thoughts and your experience with us.
Thanks for having me.
Bassam Naim, Academy Director of A&B Football. Bassam has got more certificates that I can name and count, and more experience in player development and talent ID than anybody else I know in Canada. US Youth National License, Canadian National A License, UEFA A License, Brazilian A License. And Bassam has traveled all over the world, attending many coaching conferences in Germany, Belarus, Turkey, Croatia, in Brazil, the US. Recently, he was in Colombia on a scouting trip with the with some French clubs. And Bassam also has some close professional working relationships with the French Federation and many clubs in Europe. Bassam, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Good to see you all.
And last but not least, Richard Bucciarelli. Richard is the Director of Sports Science with NSCAC, Professor of Kinesiology at Guelph and Humber, professional fitness coach, university lecturer, researcher, a published author, and a proud father and a good friend. Richard, welcome.
Thanks, Tony. Good to see you.
All right. And I am Tony LaFerrara. I'm the technical director with NSCAC, and I will be your host for today. I also want to add, before we get started, that we have invited members of the Provincial Association, the Canadian Soccer Association, to join us in this very important discussion, but they have respectfully declined to participate. We hope that they will reconsider and accept our invitation to join us in future webinars, and there will be more about this. To the viewers, if you have any questions or comments, please use your chat box, and we will try to answer as many questions as we can. And to our panels, gentlemen, you are free to express your experiences, your opinions, and your viewpoints, but I encourage everyone to do it in a professional and respectful way. All right, and so here we go. So Stephen, I'm going to start with you, if it's okay, about player development in Canada. And, the issue of player development is not unique to Canada alone. Other nations like Italy, Germany, France, England, to name a few, they all of them have had difficulties in the past. And each country, raises unique challenges and demands. So following the results of the U17 at the World Cup, Stephen, do we take a pessimistic point of view and look at the glass being half empty and decide, we throw everything away and start all over? Or can we look at the glass being half full and continue to build from there? What do you think?
Well, I think you have to look at the glass being half full, okay? it's one of those situations where you cannot, you have expectations. Do our expectations match our commitment? Right? And when I say commitment to these youth programs, okay? And I'm not in a position to say how much money was spent, et cetera, et cetera. But what I will say is that, you know, the under-17 program has always been a complex one and a difficult one. And in my time was only 2 teams that qualified, right? And just to give you a little bit of background, Holger Osek had put me in charge. And one of the things he said to me was, listen, all I want you to do is to try and identify, you know, a certain type of player, and we're going to try and give them the exposure and the experiences on an international level. But that being said, you know, you really, from each youth program, you really, especially at under 17, you're trying to get, let's say, 3, if it's a really good program, but probably 2 players to move on to your senior national team. Right? The senior national team does not need 24 players coming from an under 17 program. It needs 2 or 3 players from each under 17 program. Okay? And if we get those players the experience of being at a World Cup, of living that sort of lifestyle and that sort of competition, and we do get 2 players from each program or 3 players from each program, I think you have to look at it as fairly successful, because I know people are going to say, well, we have far less competition at that age group to move on to the senior level than other countries do. But the reality is, in almost all the other countries, you're looking at 2 players, maybe 3, that move on to the senior program. Okay?
True, yeah.
But I will say that I don't think, just from the outside looking in, the commitment to those programs has been there in terms of preparation, the money to scout the programs properly. Just a quick glance at the team, the players basically come from 3 programs, and that worries me a little bit, because you know, I would ask, are we beating the bush enough to try and identify the potential talent that's there? And again, I don't know. I couldn't answer that because you know, I don't have the sort of statistics in front of me as to how much scouting was done, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, Stephen, I think this is one of the issues, I guess, or the question that everybody's asking is, are we doing enough to find the best talent, or are we just restricting ourselves to, well, let's name it, TFC, Montreal, and Vancouver, and that's it, and that's where we look at. Is there more out there? And if there is, how do we find it? How do we notice it? How do we bring them in? I think that's the question that maybe, you know, we will try to answer later as well. But some, you know, around the same question that I was asking Stephen. You've been around, you know, you've been around, and you've been in soccer in Canada for a long time. You've seen player development in Canada. You've seen player development in France. You develop players, and you take them to Europe, and a lot of them have been very, very successful. So, what is your experience? You know, player development, comparing all of the different countries you've been in. Player development in Canada and France and all of the other places you've been at. How can you compare that?
Well, I see it as in twofold, this question for me. One fold is, what are the objectives actually that we have as a nation? And are we achieving those objectives? If the objective to be a participation or a sports participation, or soccer being a sports participation in Canada, for kids to be active, for kids to be involved, to be some kind of healthy environment, then we do have a good environment overall because we have a decent grassroots, I guess, following or an attraction, and we have kids are being active. I've been involved in the game now in many, many years, as you mentioned, 25 years on a full-time basis. I do not know what the, in all honesty, I do not know what the objectives are that we have from our national association, from our government to start with, because not just the Soccer Canada, I think government has to be involved, into the national association, into the provincial association, into the regional association. What are we trying to do? Are we trying to be just active? So if we're trying to be just active, we're good. We're active. We have a lot of kids playing, male, female, senior, the rest of it. If we're trying to achieve objectives, what are we trying to achieve first? What's the objectives? I don't know these objectives. I personally have objectives for my little world that I work in. That's not enough. I know there's other people working separately. Obviously, even though we don't live close, Stephen and I know Stephen for years, and he's a friend and a colleague. And we all have personal objective and professional objectives. So, and that's the big problem that I see in a great country like Canada, that we talk big in terms of we are a football nation. I'm not sure what that means to start with. That we have to make the World Cup, but who made that decision? I apologize here with the phone. And what's the decision? Is this a plan to make the World Cup, or is it just once every 30 odd years? Do we have the funding? Do we have the resources? Do we have the blueprint on how we're going to do it? Is it shared with the clubs around the country? Why are we only selecting players from 3 organizations? For the life of me, I don't understand it, for an example. So it's easy. Player development, actually, it's a proven equation today on the world stage. It doesn't change from one country to another, per se. The equation itself, or the essence of the equation. The only what changes is actually the cultural attachment to it. So, for an example, in France, they do it in the French way. With, I always say it, they like the baguette and the cheese. In Italy, they do it with a nice espresso, per se, right? So they have their cultural way of developing their own player. But they have it in terms of, they have objectives, they have a clear pathway, they have a clear understanding to what's needed for youth player. And are we talking just youth? Are we talking about youth to get them into the pros? And how do we get, even if we prepare them to get them into the pros, where do we put them in our country? It's a big question, in my opinion.
Thank you for watching this short preview video from the National Soccer Coaches Association of Canada. To see the full video, plus have access to hundreds of other coaching videos, blogs, webinars, and podcasts, plus free and discounted coach education courses and other soccer merchandise, plus to have exclusive access to register for all future NSCAC conventions, both live and online, click on the link below to become a member of the NSCAC today. Also, please remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, as your continued support allows us to continue to provide coach education and coach development resources to soccer coaches across Canada and worldwide. Thank you again for your continued support, and we look forward to seeing you at future NSCAC events.